prosper. When the darkness falls, it won't prevail. 'Cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph. Come on, we sing. Oh, my God will never fail. Come on, if you believe that, we sing. No, my God will never fail. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Come on, declare that. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Come on, no weapon formed. No weapon formed. Let's tell the devil this morning, he doesn't have anything on us when we follow Jesus. Let's declare that this morning. There's power in the mighty name of Jesus. And every war he wages, he will win. Come on, declare. Oh, I'm not backing down from any giant. Hey! 'Cause I know how this story ends. Declare that over your lives. We sing. I know how this story ends. We sing that. 'Cause I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. And I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. We declare that over our lives. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Come on, in this place, if we believe in the name of Jesus, nothing can stand against us. Not death, hell, or the grave. Let's tell the enemy this morning that no matter what we're facing, come on, we sing this out. Is you take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. Come on, say. You turn it for good. Over your lives, everything. We say. 'Cause you take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. Come on, sing that out. You turn it. Some of y'all need to turn around in this place this morning. Some of y'all need to turn around this place. You take what the enemy meant for evil. Sing that over your life right now. Turn it for good. You turn it for good. Come on, you take. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it. Let's sing that louder, 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 louder. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. So we declare, oh, I'm gonna see a victory. Come on, sing that out. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle, this battle, it belongs to the Lord. Come on. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you. Come on, declare that over your lives. You say, I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you. Come on, you take. 'Cause you take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. 'Cause you take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good.
right, let's get this started. So, as a famous host once said, this is America, where everyone has a right to life, love, and the pursuit of fame. And the reality of it is, it actually is a striking declaration for our generation. In fact, I was at the McDonald's drive-through window a few months ago, and it's a regular place for me to be, so you develop a little bit of a rapport with the people who are on the other side of the window. And there's this particular guy there at an undisclosed McDonald's location who hates his job. He basically just kind of carries the sentiment of most people. He complains about his job. Every time I pull up, how's it going? Awful. They don't know what they're doing around here. He's the only one in that entire building that knows what they're doing. He's it. The owner doesn't know what they're doing. The boss doesn't know what they're doing. The people on the other one, they don't know what they're doing. He's the only guy. He is so unique and he is so special that he is the only person in that entire McDonald's location who knows what he's doing. And so I'm like, hey, bro, you ever thought about doing something else? He says, oh, yes, I have a plan. Would you like to hear it? I said, I would actually like to hear it. Now, I need to describe him first. He's a blonde-headed young man who colors his hair pink, a very bright pink. And he has some quirks there that are interesting. And so I'm like, okay, you hate your job, you have a plan. What's your plan? He says, here's my plan. I am going to start a YouTube channel, and I am going to become famous. That's awesome. How are you going to become famous? People are going to watch me play video games. Really? He said, oh, yeah. They're going to watch me because I'm so interesting playing a video game, and they're going to watch me for hours, and I'm going to be famous, and I'm going to get out of this McDonald's. I said, oh, okay. And here's what's interesting. There's maybe a little bit of us that, if we're over the age of 25, we kind of smirk about such an idea. But there's an entire generation that we live in and we function around who have watched television or devices for 4.5 hours every single day, renewing their mind to not pursue love, to not pursue family, to not pursue God for sure, but literally to pursue fame. It's been drilled in their minds to the point that it has settled in their heart that they are destined to become famous. And we think, well, that's a new idea. It's actually not a new idea at all. 3,200 years ago, one of the things that is used in the gospel to validate or to at least give us a description of Joshua was that he was famous. His fame had spread in all the land. And so I can remember as I was coming into this moment of adulthood where, you were choosing a major in school or you were choosing a career path to follow. Would I get married? Would I not get married? I remember coming into this rite of passage, and with it I carried decades or years at least of faith teaching. And somehow, some of the best faith preachers on the planet I grew up listening to. And somehow I had twisted the conversation where it was no longer about faith and my relationship with God, but it was about becoming something that I wanted to become. And I had substituted a life of faith for having faith, because if I had faith, I could get what I really wanted. And so we look at these stories in the gospel and we use them as motivators not to live or pursue like they lived or what they pursued, but to have what they had. Because Joshua was famous, we want to be famous, so we want to be like Joshua. And so we study him and we see what he did, not so that we could have character, not so that we could leave a legacy, not so that we could be the person that God called us to be, but so that we could have fame. so that we could have wealth, so that we could have riches, so we could have all these things. And somehow in my head, I misinterpreted and twisted godly teaching about faith to be about me. And here's the problem. It doesn't work. Like, that's the problem. When we reverse engineer from this thing that we want to become about faith, it never ever works. What actually works, I guess, is what Jesus said. Seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added. Joshua was never seeking fame. Solomon was never seeking fame. They sought to obey God. And as they accomplished that which they sought, God blessed them beyond measure. He blessed them beyond compare. He blessed them beyond what they could ask or even think. And so let's just kind of do this. Let's drill down today. The last 3 weeks have been a lot of fun. They've been loud. You guys have been loud. It's been a good time. But before we wrap this up next week, I want to make sure there's an important piece of this that we don't miss along the way. So let's just do this. Go with me to Joshua chapter 6, and beginning at verse 27. It says, "So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. But the people of Israel broke faith in regard to the devoted things. For Achan, the son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things, and the anger of the Lord burned against the people of Israel." So let's just kind of take this from the top. The Lord was with Joshua. The Lord was with him. All of us need to live in such a way where we are close enough to God that we understand, is he with me in doing this, or did I leave him back there somewhere? One of the reasons that it's important for us to be in the presence of God is so that we understand the presence of God. When we are in the presence of God corporately, we understand it in a different way, so that when we are living individually, the presence of God that we became so comfortable with in a corporate setting, we can sense and understand in an individual setting. Because there are some of us who live in such a way from day to day that we don't really experience the presence of God. We live in a very carnal way. What we watch, what we listen to, the things that we talk about, we're just very carnal. So we don't really understand the presence of God. When we come into his house, where there is a house that has been set apart for prayer, when there is a house that isn't filled with the secular, that isn't filled with movies, that isn't filled with music that's ungodly, written by ungodly people. Rather, a place that has been dedicated to worship God. A place where strange fire has never been offered, but rather a place where the glory falls. When we get used to the presence of God in that place, we understand what it is. So that when we go away from this place and we find ourselves living life, we can actually discern, is what I'm doing something that God is with me? The Lord was with Joshua. How many of you want the Lord to be with you? Let's understand what that means. We see for the first time in Joshua chapter 1 and verse 5. The Lord said to Joshua, he said, "Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land which I swore to their fathers to give to them." Now, he says, be strong and be courageous. Then he defines what that means. He says, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night." Why? "So that you may be able to do according to all that is written in it." Not a little bit that is written in it, not the parts that you like that are written in it, so that you are able to do all that is written in it. Then After you've done all that is written in it, then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. So that's how the Lord was with Joshua. In the same way that the Lord was with Moses, so the Lord was with Joshua. That isn't a blank check. Sometimes we have this conversation. We say things like, the Lord is with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. That's true. In the same way that the Lord was with Joshua. And in the same way that the Lord was with Moses. But not in the same way that many times we put in our context that we can go and do whatever we want to do and the Lord will just be with us. That even if we didn't get it right, it doesn't really matter. It'll all work out because God is with us. So it doesn't really matter how I treat my spouse. It doesn't really matter how I treat the people that I work with. All that matters is that the Lord is with me. How is the Lord with you? See, Joshua understood this fully because he lived life submitted to Moses. This is why having a mentor who's walked the pathway before you did is a really good thing. I know sometimes we today have gotten used to picking people who have some of the things that we want to have, and they're like a virtual mentor. We kind of study them from afar. The problem is we've never been submitted to them. The problem is they've never actually looked into our lives and understood us where they can say, hey, you're looking over here. This is your problem. When we have mentors who actually have a relationship with us and we have a relationship with them, God gives them words as parents to us that shape us in such a way so that just as the Lord was with them, He will be with us. But when we stop looking to those who've walked before us because we see it as, well, maybe they've had their time already and I want to find somebody. No, you already missed the point. You already missed the point. There is a former and a latter anointing that is able to come together in your life. And when you discard that of the former, you throw out things like character. You throw out things like integrity. And when we get rid of those things, seeking the things that we really want, we have no idea how to have what God wants to give us. God wasn't just with Joshua. He was with Joshua as he was with Moses. It's not just for us to do whatever it is that we would like to do. This is why we submit our lives to the gospel. The gospel has a unique way of getting into our business. The gospel has a unique way of directing us to understand what gifts God has placed within us so that we will be satisfied with what God has given us and we won't be distracted by what God has not. When we get this, when we are meditating on His Word day and night, I'm not pursuing the latest consumer gadget. I'm pursuing what God told me He wants to give me. It will be on the path and within the space where He has gifted me. See, the world just says things like, just follow your dreams. Do whatever you want to do. Why? Why in the world would I do whatever I want to do? I don't know about you, but sometimes when I get in my head, I don't need to do whatever I want to do. And maybe you're a whole lot better than I am, but I'm pretty sure most of the time I needn't do whatever I want to do. Well, just follow your own desires. I don't. Don't. Follow His desires. I know y'all are so much better. Right? No, He places those desires that He has gifted us to achieve. And we find ourselves content with that. We embrace the limitation, if you will. That's not a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. Just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. What land did God promise Moses? The same land that He promised Joshua, and not one extra acre. What is that? It's a boundary. It's a limitation. This is what God says you can have and nothing else. This is how God has told you to get there and no way else. And when I embrace the path, I embrace the limitation of that path. When I embrace the promised land, I embrace the boundary of that land. When God has given me a promise and He has given me a function, I guarantee you my function will produce enough. It will be successful enough to have whatever He told me I could have. But we get disgruntled with our position because we want to take the boundary and make it bigger. Not because God said we could have it, but because somebody else has it and we want what they have. That is not faith, that is envy. There's a huge difference. And because in our generation we've conflated conversations, we no longer fully understand what faith actually is. Faith will receive the promise that God made you, but it will not bring you the promise that God made them. So I have to walk with God and know God and have God with me so that I can achieve and receive all that God said I will have. So look at it like this, because I know some of you are like, I don't know. Okay. God came to Moses and He said, I want you to go and have this conversation with Pharaoh, and I want you to tell him to set my people free. Now here's what Moses said in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "Oh my Lord, I am not eloquent, either since the past or since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." So here is a personal limitation. I can't do these things. It's just a problem. I can't get there, like whether it was stuttering, whether it was just slow. Like I have no idea. What I do know is Moses had an issue it kept him from wanting to pursue God. We need to quit using what we don't have as an excuse to not use what we do. Clearly, God was not worried about Moses' speech impediment, because He went on in verse 12 and He said this. After Moses got done pleading his case, God just, like He didn't even hear him. He said, "Go, for I will be with your mouth. And I will teach you the things that you need to say." Amen. But then Moses said, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." And then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And He said, "Well, is there not Aaron, your brother, a Levite? I know he speaks well. Behold, he is coming out to greet you. And when he sees you, his heart will be glad. So I will be with your mouth, and I will be with his mouth, and I will teach you both what to say." Now here's what is fascinating to me. Moses didn't speak well before he met the Lord. He meets the Lord gives him instructions, and he still doesn't speak well. If you're just coming to God because you want Him to just fix all your problems, you are going to be disappointed. I want to be maybe the only person alongside of Pastor Reggie to tell you that. Moses didn't speak well before he met the Lord, and he didn't speak well after. And God wasn't bothered by it. God just said, "I'll be with your mouth." In other words, it's not going to be about your eloquence. It's not going to be about your great strength. It's going to be my words that I place in your mouth. So don't worry about what doesn't seem like you're very good at. I'm telling you, if I'm with you, you will be able to do it. This is why I look neither at my strengths nor my weaknesses. I just look to God, what are you telling me to do? And I'll just do that. It will not be accomplished because I'm awesome, and it will not be accomplished because I'm horrible. It will be accomplished because God is with me. And when we embrace that, we no longer find our strength or our arrogance or our confidence in ourselves, and we're no longer insecure because of ourselves. We just stand bold in Him. We just stand bold in Him. We just embrace, if this is what you've told me to do, I'm just going to do it. If this is what you've told me I can have, then this is what I'm going to have. Because when we get outside of that, that's where we begin to fall into problems. Achan broke faith with God. How? Why did he break faith? Because he took something that wasn't his. When we pursue what God has not given us, we are breaking faith. We're breaking faith. God has given us commands. He has given us boundaries. And if we will just follow the command and live in the boundary, guess what? Our life will be full. Now, our generation has this kind of issue right now where we take the gospel and we're making excuses for it. The gospel, let me just remind you, is a boundary. The fullness of the gospel, this is what God says, this is how you live. This is how you speak. This is how you work. This is how you interact with society. It's not just about benevolence. It's not just about justice. It's not just about holiness. It's not just about faith. It's not just about grace. It's about all of it. And the whole thing kind of holds in tension with Jesus at the center. That's what living a gospel-centered life means. It means that I am associating with Him, I am submitting to Him, and I'm doing all these things that He told me to do, all that is in the book. And what I kept getting wrong was it would be like if I needed something, then I would go to the Word and see what the Word said about the something that I needed, and then I would neglect everything else in the Word, and I would just pursue that. The only time I needed faith was when I needed something. If I didn't need something, I didn't need faith. But we've been told clearly in Scripture, both covenants, the just will live by faith. Corinthians tells us to walk by faith. Hebrews talks about all these things that they accomplished by faith. It's not just have faith. Yes, we have faith. Jesus said, have faith. It's not a message that is against a message. It's together. Having faith and living by faith aren't opposed to each other. It's all faith. And when we embrace the fullness of that, there is a boundary to it, but in that boundary is everything that God said we can have. I want to make sure we capture this, because the whole problem with this story is Achan reached outside of what God said he could have. And he just thought, well, God is just with us. And so here's why this story ended tragically, and then God had to flip it around. So they leave Jericho. When they're in Jericho, like we talked about last week, when they left Jericho, Achan took gold and stuff that he was told to leave. He was told to leave it, and he took it. So now he goes and he keeps it. And now along their journey, they come to this city called Ai. And they go to take it because they're taking the land. And in Joshua chapter 7, in verse 4, it says, about 3,000 men left the people of Israel, and they went up to fight. And they fled before the men of Ai. They fled. They didn't win the battle. Now, here is a group of people. Please capture this. They were the people of faith. They were the generation that said, we can take the promised land. They were the generation that God said, you can have this. They were the generation that walked across the Jordan. They were the generation that marched around the walls of Jericho. Now they're just going and taking a little city. In comparison, if we look at Jericho and Ai, it's not even comparable. Not even comparable. And yet here they won a glorious battle. Why? Because the Lord was with them. Here they lost. Why? Because He was not with them. Remember, just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Let's back up a little bit. They had a moment where the children of Israel, under the leadership of Moses, were going to go into the promised land. Remember the story of the spies. They come back, they said, we can't do this. Moses says, fine, we can't do it. God said we're going to wander around in the wilderness for the next 40 years. They sleep on it. They wake up. They change their mind. Okay, we'd rather like at least try this. And so they said, we're going to go up and we're going to fight. The people that said we can't do it one day before, now they're saying we're going to go up and fight. The people that God said, that's your land. The people that God gave them the law, the people whom God, He literally spread the waters of the Red Sea so they could walk across it. These people, they said, we're going to go fight. We're going to take the promised land. And in Numbers chapter 14 and verse 41, Moses said, do not go up. Because the Lord is not with you. You will be defeated by your enemies. So now Joshua lives through this. Oh, and by the way, they went up anyhow and they lost. It happens throughout the God. You see it all the time. So now let's go back to our story. So now here they are. They go up and fight. They fled. They lost. They come back to the camp defeated. 36 of them died. 3,000 went up, 36 of them died. Everybody came back a loser. And now they're in the camp and Joshua's devastated. He's absolutely devastated. And so he puts on his sackcloth and he's just mourning before the Lord and before all the people. And God says, what's your problem? Why are you having this? The problem is there's sin in the camp. It's not that I'm not calling you to win. It's not that I changed my mind about you taking the promised land. It's not that I shrunk the boundary to Jericho. What it is you have sin in the camp and you can't go any further until you deal with the thing that you have to deal with. And this is the part of faith that we miss when it's just about quoting a few scriptures and getting a few cars. We refuse to deal with the sin issue. When we're walking by faith and we are living by faith, we cannot live by disobedience and faith at the same time. It's impossible. It is impossible. So God had to deal with the sin that was in their lives. And here's the flash for us. He has to deal with ours as well. Is God with us or not? It's a quick little decision-making matrix. If you do something that ends horribly, it was because of one of two issues. One, it was just a terrible idea. You just, you asked her out, she said no, it's just a bad idea. So we just don't do that again, right? Okay, now we move on to the next thing, and here's a thing that we felt like God told us we should be doing, a thing that God told us we could have, and then we go to do it, and it ends badly. And then we say, why did this end badly? God told me I could. And He says, yeah, I told you could have that, but I also told you couldn't have that, and you won't get this out of your life. And until you do, you can't have that. And we've gotten frustrated as if there's something wrong with the faith that we have. The issue isn't the faith that you have, it's the faith that you're not living by. It's the faith that you're not walking by. And for some of you, you're in your walk with God and you're pretty early in the game and it's tough. I mean, it's hard. You just feel like it's always about not doing something. And I just want to tell you, it gets better. It gets better. You get married, it gets easier. You get a little money in your pocket, it gets easier. Some things just get easier. Ecclesiastes tells us money solves all things. When you're broke, some things are harder than when you have abundance. It gets easier, but the struggle needs to be engaged. But there are also a lot in this room, and you're like career Christians. You've been saved for decades. And for you, the issue, it's not as much about not doing things that you shouldn't be doing. It's about doing things that you should. Now here's where I struggle. This is where I'm trying to find God all the time. I was in it wasn't the DMV, it felt like the DMV. I was at the immunization office the other day with my wife. We just felt like a day off should be spent at a government office. You work 6 days a week. Honey, what do you want to do today? Oh, let's go get the immunization cards for the kids. I would love to do that. After that, we went furniture shopping again. If I sound a little harsh today, it's because of how I spent my weekend. Okay, so I'm in a government office. They send you to the room once you're done. All we had to do was get the kids' names taken off of a Colorado sheet and put on a Florida sheet for the school. That's it. That's all we had to do, and we were there forever. So I'm in this room, and here comes this other guy, and he sits in the room. Cool guy. An island man. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't meet people from Guam every day. And I'm sitting there and I'm having a conversation with a man from Guam. I didn't even know where it was. Like, where is that? He describes it to me. Do you speak English? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just like this fascinating moment. And in my heart, I just knew that I needed to say something about Jesus. And I couldn't figure out how to work the conversation over there. As if it had to have some perfect segue to get from talking about the beach and cave diving to Jesus. And I was sitting there like, it's like a, shifting without a clutch. God, I can't really say it here, and I can't say it there. And I sat the entire time and argued with God, and then they said, Garland Scarborough, and now we're up. And I didn't do it. So now I had to spend the last 2 days praying that God would send somebody else across Antonio's pathway because he couldn't use me. What a loser. Oh, great. I didn't curse this week. I didn't get high this week. I didn't get drunk this week. I didn't cheat on my spouse. Awesome. But there's a guy possibly on his way to hell, and I wouldn't say a word to him. VIP. Right? Like, why? Why? And so the next time I go to do something, here's the thing. If I can't get this straight, I won't make it as far as I should over here. Why? Because I'm not walking by faith. And I know if it's true for me, then God's probably been dealing with you about some things as well. Why don't we just obey him? Why don't we just do the thing that we need to do? Because here's what happened. Joshua goes in and he has this conversation with God. God says, fix the sin. He fixes the sin. He cleans everything all out. Then he takes a group of men. They go back to the city of Ai. And in chapter 7 and verse 28, it says, Joshua burned the city to the ground and left it a heap of ruins. Now, if we can neglect the violence of that statement, just understand it means he won. He won. What miracle does God have for you? What victory does God have in front of you? How are we going to take it? By faith. We're going to take it by faith. We're going to get there by faith. I realize this sounds work-based. I realize that in our generation, this is a conversation that sounds like we're earning something. Please realize that grace, the concept of grace, has no problem with striving. It just has a problem with earning. It's not that we earned the thing over here because we did this over here. It's that we now position ourselves and qualify ourselves for God to give us what he said he wanted to give us. See, if we go back 20 years ago, the conversation really was, 30 years ago, was all about achievement, the national conversation. It was all about achievement. It's when there was a self-help boom. It's when we all talked about getting better, getting better, getting better, getting better. And then people got frustrated with that conversation. In the church world, it was a very faith conversation. It was very like the prosperity gospel kind of showed up during that phase. It all happened. Everything nationally was an achievement focus. Then over time, there were some bankruptcies, there were some Enrons, there were some issues that happened, there were some recessions, and now we've gone from achievement to entitlement. Since it doesn't look like this worked, now we're going to jump on this bandwagon. The entitlement bandwagon nationally at the church conversations looks like this: grace. So we don't talk about faith anymore. Now we just talk about grace, the thing that you can't earn, the thing that you don't deserve. It just happens for you. And it's no longer about serving God, living for God, living by faith, walking by faith. It's just about having whatever God gives you. And the problem is that conversation will lead you to hell, and this conversation will lead you to bankruptcy. But when we hold both conversations, that by grace God has made us promises, but He's only made us certain promises, and all of those promises that He's made us, we will receive by faith, and faith never lives in such a way that it's just going to happen no matter what, but faith pursues, faith goes after, faith fixes, faith obeys, then we receive the reward of grace that He promised us on this side. So it's like grace brings the promise, we live and walk by faith, and then grace gives us the reward. It all works together. One isn't against the other. It all works together. And that's what we see here. When Joshua and they just went out to win the battle all by themselves, the Lord wasn't with them because there was sin in the camp. They lost. When they came back and they repented and they fixed stuff, then by faith they went and they won. Some of you are discouraged because you did something that you should do, but you lost, and you're frustrated because you lost. And I'm just telling you, if you'll fix the thing that God was already telling you to fix, and you go back and you fight the battle again, you'll win this time. Not because you're awesome, but because you did what God told you to do. Because here's the thing, guys. We don't have to win. It's actually possible to get this thing wrong. And then we don't get to step into the promise that God made us. I'm going to end with a sobering thought. Talked about Moses and his issue with speaking. He didn't think he deserved, didn't think he earned, didn't think he should. God got frustrated with him, but he recognized where he was in the journey. I'm going to editorialize a little. He recognized where he was in the journey, and he gave him Aaron. Sometimes God will give you a crutch for a little while. Sometimes God will look the other way for a little while. But just know, whatever you got away with, eventually you're going to have to deal with. There will come a time when you have to deal with it. And so almost 40 years later, after the conversation God had with Moses about his non-eloquence, now the children of Israel come to a place where there's no water. They're right there near going into the promised land. There's no water. Then God brings Moses and Aaron aside, and he says, Moses, I want you to go speak to the rock. I want you to speak to it. And Moses and Aaron say, okay. And they go gather everybody up, and they go up to the rock. And in the Numbers chapter 20 and verse 11, it said that Moses lifted up his hand, and he struck the rock twice with his staff. He hit it the first time, and nothing happened. Now all the people of God are thirsty. All the people of God are around. He hit it once and nothing happened. God gave him another chance. Two things were working here. One, Moses needed to be obedient, and all of his people needed to drink water. He hit it twice. And it said water came out abundantly, the people drank, and all their livestock drank. Water coming out of the rock was to give the people what they needed. Even though Moses was disobedient, the people still drank. Sometimes leaders get things wrong, but God still moves on behalf of the people. Why? Because God loves us all. But then he pulls Moses and Aaron aside, and he says, because you did not believe in me, and because you didn't uphold me as holy in the sight of the people of Israel, you will not bring this assembly up into the land which I promised to give them. It's the first time Moses was no longer in the promise. It was no longer about Moses going into the promised land. It was all about the generation that would follow him that would go into the promised land. And we read blogs and watch vlogs, and people complain like, well, simple little thing. Moses, just one little thing he didn't do. God had been dealing with him for 40 years. He'd been dealing with him for 40 years. And here's what this should have looked like. He should have walked up to that rock and he should have said, wah, 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 water, I command you to come out. And water would have come out, and an entire generation would have seen that it is not by might, that it is not by power, but it is by the Spirit of God. And it doesn't matter what strengths you have, and it doesn't matter what weaknesses you carry. If you will just obey God, God will move on your behalf. It wasn't about Moses. It was about people seeing something that would encourage them to do what God said they could do, because they were about to go over a river, but they needed to go with something different. But Moses couldn't show them the way. I don't care what you sound like. If God tells you to do something, do it. It doesn't matter. We are living in a generation, a Joshua generation, where we are surrounded by chaos. We are surrounded by problems that we have not seen for a very long time. And it is going to take rabid obedience for us to just do what God has called us to do so that we can see him do what he's promised to do. I'm not going to be content just praying for somebody with a cold and watching them sneeze once and say, thank you, Jesus. I'm ready to see the dead raised. I'm ready to see the lame walk. I'm ready to see blind see. I'm ready to see that little boy who can't hear and he's just tugging and watching. All of a sudden, God comes in to his life and sets him free. And I don't care if you pray for him or I pray for him or somebody in the parking lot prays for him. Somebody is going to obey God, and God's going to do what God promised to do. And it will be the fame of Jesus that takes over our church, that takes over our community, that takes over our nation, that takes over our world. And it looks like it's impossible, but I don't care. It's not by might, it's not by power. It's not by might, it's not by power. It's time for us to clean up the junk so we can see the fullness of God in our generation.